Thank you. Okay, so we just finished watching the video on Karl Marx, and personally, I don't really like the way that video ends. One, they essentially tell viewers that, hey, instead of examining the world, you should go out and change it. Well, what the hell do you know about the world that you should go and change it? How about fixing your own life first before you attempt to change something bigger than that? Right? Start with yourself before you move on to anything else. Additionally, it's not obvious to me that Karl Marx's answers were a correct diagnosis of the issues. People have a tendency to blame a lot of things on capitalism, which potentially could just simply be a part of human nature and the human experience. For example, okay, soon enough you will be on summer break, and for many of you that will be the end of your educational journey. For some of you, maybe you'll go to school in September. Looking back at your previous summer breaks, about how many weeks into summer break were you bored out of your mind?
8.
8 weeks? Okay. For those of you who work, maybe you have something to do, you're busy. But for those of you who are simply sitting around at home after 2, 3, 4 weeks of sitting around at home doing nothing, or doing whatever it is you want, which is what a lot of communists argue for, it gets incredibly boring. Even if you're on vacation, after a few weeks of that, it's like you want something to do that is interesting, engaging, and different than the mundane everyday life. And so it's not clear to me that the solutions provided are correct. Actually, it is quite clear to me they're not correct. Terrible ideas, okay? Anyways, he did point out some very good criticisms. They're bolded here. So work is alienating. There is a discussion going on in modern society of, well, how much should you earn as minimum wage? Should every job be able to provide enough money to, let's say, pay for a house, for multiple children, and for some, creature comforts or luxurious goods? And it's not clear to me that the answer to that question is yes. Again, we already discussed some work is more valuable than others. Some work requires more responsibility, accountability, training. There's less room for screw-ups in certain work than there is in other work. And so the value of work done is not equal. But this idea that, if you are working, let's say a simple, straightforward job, a minimum wage job, it's not going to be the most fun or meaningful work you do in your life. And the time period you do that work in is usually when you're young, maybe up until your 20s, while you're maybe preparing to enter into some sort of profession, trade, or craft. But until you do that, that work can be very alienating. So I worked with UPS for a couple of months. I worked in their warehouse before the trucks left the warehouse to deliver things. And you're essentially just watching a conveyor belt and pulling your boxes off of the conveyor belt and then putting those boxes into a truck. It's not very meaningful work. Okay, but it paid the bills for a short amount of my life. Okay, and that's the criticism he's pointing out. When work gets too specialized, people don't see themselves as a necessary contributor to the work and to the outcome of that work. Work is also insecure, or it can be. So obviously, part of the issue in this that gets overlooked is government intervention. Those of you who are aware of Detroit know that their car industry collapsed and all these jobs were lost. Well, if you look into Thomas Sowell's work, I have his poster on the board up there, he emphasizes how the build up to the collapse of the car market there and car productions was governments increasing taxes on the production of these vehicles and taxing the wealthy members too much. And these people, they have enough money, they have the means to simply take their business and move it elsewhere. And that's exactly what they did when their taxes went up. And you might think that that's unethical or wrong, but when it's your paycheck and you're losing a significant portion of it, it doesn't feel so good. Especially if you don't agree with what it's being spent on. So in that regard, work can be insecure because a capitalist could simply say, well, work is cheaper to do on this side of the planet than it is on that side of the planet, and they'll just move their factory. Workers are paid little There are many challenges, many obstacles to that statement. Again, the less people who can do your job, the more you can negotiate for a higher wage. Additionally, your ability to speak, write, and think is all correlated to your ability to request for a higher wage as well. Okay, you don't just have to wait for your boss to give you a raise. Now, obviously, if the minimum wage has been increased to 15, and I heard somewhere they're trying to raise the minimum wage again to like $16 or something, $16.25, which means, let's be honest, and you may not be familiar with this information, but it's going to make it more difficult for young people to find jobs. Okay, and as Walter Williams would argue in his book about race and economics, when governments interfere with minimum wage laws, what he noted and observed during the time period when slavery was allowed in America was that all of a sudden there's no cost to the person who is paying employees. There's no cost to discriminate. Essentially what he was saying is that when there's no minimum wage, what some black slaves would do is they would ask their slave owner, they would request permission to go and work for someone else, after hours, and give some of their wage to the owner in a process to buy their own freedom. And the opportunity that was given to these individuals was that, they could go to someone and say, hey, so that white guy over there wants you to hire him for, let's say $5 an hour, which would have been a lot 200 years ago. I'll do the work for $1.25 an hour. Now, if that person wants to be racist and discriminate between white and black people, they have to pay about $375 an hour more. So it's actually costing them to discriminate. And Walter Williams lays out a very good argument where the government was being pressured by certain people to raise the minimum wage because a lot of people who may have had more suitable work or more suitable ethnicity at the time weren't able to find work because they couldn't compete with the low prices. And so again, when a government steps in to say, well, so that you can survive, we'll raise the minimum wage, the cost of employment, the cost of running a business goes up. The threshold and requirement for employees goes up as well, because you wouldn't want to hire someone who's 13 years old, never had a job before, 14 years old, and pay them $15, $16, $17 an hour. It's not clear to me that someone at that age with no skills, no experience is even worth that much an hour either. Not that they can't get there, but starting there is quite a bit. So this idea that workers are paid little, again, when there's no government intervention, you can argue for your own wages. And if you develop a reputation for being really good at working, providing excellent results, well, then more people are going to hire you, hypothetically speaking. Capitalism is unstable. We won't get into that too much. And we'll skip down to his ideal future. So for Karl Marx, the ideal future is there's no private property, no inherited wealth. So let's say you decide to work really hard for your children's sake. I have a friend right now, he's doing that. So his family, like mine, migrated here from Pakistan. He grew up very poor. Him, his mom, siblings, many people in the household worked. Many different jobs, had to pay bills collectively to survive. They were living out in BC and Surrey. But because we live in a more free market and capitalist economy, he's now able to have his own home with his wife and potentially, keep that home long enough for his children to have it. And so his children benefit from his diligence, his hard work. Okay, but Karl Marx doesn't want that. Steep income tax, so the more you earn, the more you get taxed, which is very counterproductive, right? If you have people who are very productive, ideally you want to remove roadblocks from their way. There's a really excellent book by, the guy's name is Ron Clark, it's called Move Your Bus. It's like you want to find the people in your organization, on your team, in your family, whatever you're working with, who are producing the most results. They're moving this bus, hypothetical bus, and you don't want to limit their opportunities and restrict them, right? Karl Marx's philosophy is the opposite. It's, hey, if you're very productive and you're making a lot of money, well, we're going to take a whole lot of that money, because what do you need that money for? What are you doing amassing $1, 5, $10 million, $1 billion. Now, I'm not making a value judgment on how much money a person needs, but for example, Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon, how many of you, show of hands, how many of you have used Amazon before? Okay, so that's about half the class. Was it very convenient? Right? You're paying for that convenience. And Jeff Bezos is capitalizing his idea and the hard work he put into the company. And so, fair enough. Like, if I had a wonderful idea and I worked hard for it, I would love to be paid for that as well. Instead, I'm a teacher. Okay, centralized banking, communication, transport, we already talked about that. Free public education, we already talked about that. The last point they do make in the video is that Marx's works were paid for by Friedrich Engels' father, who owned a factory. Right, so his work was being paid for by capitalists. And in fact, I learned from a different friend of mine that apparently Karl Marx and his buddy Friedrich Engels were just party animals in university, and they were just throwing out these hypothetical ideas. Apparently neither of them actually ever worked like a real job. They didn't actually struggle like the people they wrote about did. And so obviously there's challenges there. Okay, so summarizing the socialist response. Okay, some socialists responded by setting an example. Right, we looked at, I think it was Robert Owen. That capitalism can work if business owners are ethical and intentional about the environment they set up. Okay, and a lot of individualism and even collectivism requires leadership, which is clearly something that's sorely lacking in society nowadays. But there are examples here and there historically of people taking leadership and trying to make things better. And that is something that should be more promoted. Now, obviously, I don't mean the authoritarian dictatorial leadership that we'll look at when we look at Russia and Germany, Nazi Germany. Okay. Other socialist thinkers responded by suggesting the only solution was revolution, likely a violent revolution, and going the complete opposite direction, right? So we would call those people radicals. They want to radically change the system, overthrow it quickly, as fast as possible, because the utopia, the heaven on earth, needs to be ushered in. But human beings do move at a slower pace. It's very difficult to change culture. There's going to be a lot of people who don't want to change it, might be very stubborn. This also relates to temperament, right? People who are high in openness, they're more likely to try out new ideas, new experiences, new things, and consider new ways of being. The people who are lower in openness are not likely to do that at all, or very slowly. And interestingly enough, that personality trait is well associated with political beliefs. So people who are high in openness are typically more likely to be liberal, right? And liberal here in this case doesn't necessarily mean Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party. It just means liberal as in more open to ideas and different ways of doing things. Whereas people who are low in openness, it's been associated with more conservative behavior, right? They want less change, essentially. A conservative wants less change. Okay. A more universal belief was that there was a need to ensure equal opportunity, potentially even equal outcome, for all individuals, and to change how wealth was distributed in society. Yes? Yes, you may. Right, so again, the main core question that socialism attempts to address is, what do you do with inequality? And some people's response is you give them more opportunity, as many opportunities as they can possibly manage. Other people's response is, well, you use the government, you use some mechanism to redistribute this wealth. Some people are way unequal, they're up here, and there's a lot of people down here. Well, that person up here should give to the people down below. Some people would argue that that's theft. So within some of the acceptable forms of socialism, you have democratic socialism, which is essentially, you have some degree of right and opportunity to vote for the people who are in charge of your city of your province, of your country, and you're basically buying this vote for how you want those tax dollars to be spent. The second point is important. Democratic socialism acknowledges that you can in fact make change. It's going to happen slower, takes more time, but it can happen peacefully by allowing people an educated opportunity to vote on who they would like to run their government, run their city. And interestingly enough, so in Canada we have a couple different political parties, more or less they're not that different on policies, and these parties can shift over time. One of the criticisms of the Conservative Party right now is that they're quite left-leaning and liberal in their thought process and policies. One of the critiques of the Liberal Party and the NDP right now is that they're way too far left-leaning and that they're way too extreme on the socialist front. Okay, but historically that isn't always the case. These parties shift because the people who run them change over time, and the people who are existing change over time. Okay, and obviously the process is through elections and various reforms. Okay, and the goal of these societies, the goal of this democratic socialism approach is to create a society that included elements of both socialism and liberalism, right? There's this idea that we want to give people opportunity to earn money, to create wealth, to function. I'll take a question in a moment. But we also want to make sure that our population, that 5, 10, 15, 20% of it isn't left at the bottom to basically be in survival mode all the time. So just an example idea from the Declaration of Principles of the Social Democracy of America, 1897. So men are born free and have certain rights, such as the rights to life, liberty, and happiness. This idea reflects liberal beliefs and values. While citizens have the same political rights, this does not make them equal because of the vast economic inequality between the classes. Greater economic equality should exist in society. This idea reflects socialist beliefs and values. And again, it's always going to be a challenge of how do you reduce inequality. There's an old saying. It goes, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Okay, and part of how that works is that, like right now, many of you are choosing to sit on your phone, which means you're not paying attention. Some of you are choosing to take notes, partake in the lecture. Right? You all have that various opportunity, and it's not up to me to force you like a dictator of what to do. Right? You're in grade 12. In a couple months, you will be set free and loose into the world. It'll be up to you to make your own decisions. You're not going to have a babysitter. You might have a mom or a dad who will babysit you. I don't think you really want that as you start to age past 18. You ideally want to develop yourself into your own capable adult. So dealing with inequality is complicated because, sure, there can be job opportunities out there, but you can't make a person apply, nor can you make them continue to work at a job they don't like. Some of you have probably worked with someone who quit after 6 to 8 weeks because they didn't like what was going on. Maybe they didn't like having to work. And fair enough, you don't have to like having to work. You can produce money in a variety of ways, but if you're just gonna mooch off your parents and live in their basement, consider the drain you're having on your family. So with democratic socialism, there is a belief in a core group of liberal ideas. So democracy, freedom, individual rights. they believe that capitalism infringed on workers' rights and reduced their freedoms. And so when I go to remake all of these notes, I'm currently wrapping up remaking Unit 1. I've started the process of remaking Unit 2. I would look more into the second statement because, again, it's not clear to me where capitalism reduces your rights. Again, a more pure form of capitalism essentially provides you more opportunities, which is something, as personally for my future, my career, is something I'm looking for, just more opportunities to learn and grow as a person, as a teacher, potentially as a coach. And so being able to unrestrictedly find those opportunities and access them is very beneficial. It wouldn't make me very happy if certain school boards said, well, if you're not born in Canada, don't bother applying. Or if you partake in a certain faith, don't bother applying. Right? They're restricting opportunities. So, democratic socialist solution, again, like socialism, is to involve the government into the economy, into life. And you can kind of think of that as, I don't know, if you're getting bullied, you ask your older brother to come to school and beat the kid up, right? Like, that's essentially how the government is acting, like the older brother, or, I don't know, maybe some people bring their dad into the equation, get their dad to beat up a kid, I don't know. Right, you're essentially involving an other entity into your life to solve your problems for you. Right, so there's not a lot of self-reliance in that socialist agenda. And again, people like Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell commented a lot on how government policies then, leave people weak. Right? So if you live in a country where no matter what mistake you make, the government will be there to catch you before you fall and hit the floor with your face. For some people, then there's no real incentive to not continuously fall and hit the floor. Okay, and here's just a little chart of the difference. I don't know how many more slides we have here. Okay. Sure. There you go. Hello. Just inviting strangers into the classroom and distributing things that aren't yours. Like a true socialist.
That's good, right?
Not if you're in this class.
Oh.
Okay. What is on here? My God, I gotta edit these slides and have less words on them. This is ridiculous. Okay. What's that? Oh, say it out loud.
Should I go to the vending machine?
Sure.
What do you want to?
Okay, in Canada in particular, a lot of these democratic socialist ideas began during the Great Depression. That's what this slide is about. In the Great Depression, you have the halt of the economy, you have massive business shutdowns, bankruptcy, unemployment is at 27%. So that's basically 1 in every 4 people didn't have a job, potentially because there were no jobs available. The belief was it was caused by an unregulated economy. The hardships made the prospect of a more equal and fair society much more appealing. The idea that the government needed to do something. And obviously there are situations where you might think like, hey, we need someone to lead us out of this mess. Okay, but the more I learn about the Great Depression, the more I learn about this material, the more sources I find for the idea or the notion that actually the government played a significant role in creating the environment necessary for the Great Depression to occur. Okay, but I gotta go do more research about that and put that in my notes at some point. Okay, so we're going to, in the next couple of slides, look at the creation of the NDP. You know what? Maybe we should take a 5-minute break. How do we feel about that? Okay, we'll pause this here.